Good morning, everyone. How y'all doing today? Good morning. Today is Monday, April 12th, 2021. Welcome to Women and Gender Studies, Asian Pacific Islander American Studies, American Culture 363, Asian Pacific Islander American Women. I'm Professor Emily Lawsin, or Auntie Emily, as the students sometimes call me. If you are here for the first time, we have a series of webinars this semester, and we are welcoming you today to our special joint series with our American Culture, Asian Pacific Islander American Studies 301 class, Asian Americans and Civil Rights, and for a special book talk on the amazing new book called Fight the Tower, Asian American Women Scholars, Resistance and Renewal in the Academy. And we'll have the editors of that book with us in a little bit. We have been meeting all semester for this course since we are still in a pandemic. We've been meeting remotely and virtually this year. And so we want to thank you all for taking time out from your busy schedules so early in the morning for folks on the West Coast to join us today. We want you to type your name in the chat. This is how we normally do it. Type your name in the chat and where you are from, since that is a microaggression that us Asian Americans, especially women, are asked every day, or what indigenous land you're logging in from. If you're a poet like we are, or if you're Filipino American or Pinay, or if you're multiracial, or if you're Vietnamese, like our speakers and I, or if you're from Professor Valverde's hometown of Oakland, California, or Professor Dariotis' hometown of San Francisco, California, or from my hometown and where I met Dr. Dariotis, Seattle, Washington, go ahead and also put that in the chat. And you can use the chat for comments and reactions. We're also using that for students for attendance and extra credit purposes if you're from another class, or if you're from the class that I teach. We'd like you to use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, or I guess wherever your controls are. There's a little Q&A box where you can type in questions. So that keeps the questions separate from the chat. Since we are poets and writers and scholars, we love to see words, okay? I may not be able to see them all on the screen, but I read them later. But we have our excellent staff behind the scenes, Lisa Toon from the Department of American Culture, monitoring that for us as well. So go ahead and type whatever reactions you have during this session into the chat. It keeps the energy flowing. Since we cannot see you during this webinar, we welcome and we rely on your words and reactions to keep the energy flowing here in this Zoom room. And I'm going to ask the students who may be in either of the courses, when you type your Q&A, your question in the Q&A box, if you'd like to appear on screen or to unmute your audio when you ask that question, please note that in the Q&A box as well. Okay. Otherwise, I will try to just read them for that. I'll just read them for you, I should say. Oh, all right. Yes. Oh, Dr. Valverde said, if you're Vietnamese or Spanish, that's right. Tell us that too. Yes. Or if you're Greek or Swedish or Chinese. Yes. All right. Tell us all of that. All right. Okay, so I'm going to be looking for your comments in the chat. Go ahead, everyone, log in on the chat and tell us where you're representing from today. Okay. All right. And before we get started, I want to say a big maraming salamat, thank you, mahalo to our sponsors, the Women's and Gender Studies Department, the Asian Pacific Islander American Studies Program, and the Department of American Culture, especially event coordinator Lisa Toon, who made the flyers and set up this webinar, and who's monitoring all of the things behind the scenes for us today. Thank you, Lisa. Also, shout out to the United Asian American Organizations, UAAO, and our Filipino American Students Association, FASA, for always helping to spread the word about these events. Okay. In March and April on the University of Michigan campus, we actually commemorate Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month, which is usually commemorated in May nationwide, but since we're out of classes then, we do it now. So I want to thank you all for joining us in another one of our series for Asian Pacific Islander American Heritage Month. Okay. Yay! All right. Okay, keep those chat. If you're just joining us, we're asking you to log in on the chat. Keep the energy going. Tell us where you're from, or your ethnic background, your hometown, or what indigenous land you're calling in from today. Okay. Today we are here to discuss this amazing book, Fight the Tower. Fight the Tower, Asian American Women Scholars, Resistance and Renewal in the Academy, which was edited by our guests today, Dr. Kieu Linh Caroline Valverde and Dr. Ming Dariotis. I want to tell you a little bit about the book. Asian American women scholars experience shockingly low rates of tenure and promotion because of the particular ways they are marginalized by the intersectionalities of race and gender in academia. And those of us in academia know this and face this every day. Although Asian American studies critics have long since debunked the model minority myth that constructs Asian Americans as the ideal academic subject, university administrators still treat Asian American women in academia as though we will simply show up and shut up. And consequently, because silent complicity is expected, power holders will punish and oppress Asian American women severely when we question or critique the system. However, as we know, change is in the air. Fight the Tower is a continuation of the Fight the Tower movement. Y'all, if you're on social media, go ahead, hashtag Fight the Tower for us. Also, I think we're all on social media. You could tag us too. Even the Department of American Culture is on, and Women and Gender Studies is on social media. So go ahead and tag us there. Fight the Tower is a continuation of the Fight the Tower movement, which supports women standing up for their rights to claim their earned place in academia and to work for positive change for all within academic institutions. The essays, poetry, studies, narratives within this amazing volume provide powerful portraits, reflections, and analyses of a population often rendered invisible by the lies that sustain intersectional injustices in order to operate an oppressive system. So I welcome you to check out the book, to purchase the book. It is available from Rutgers University Press. For those of you at the University of Michigan, our library staff has been gracious enough to provide a free copy of the electronic book on the UMich Library website. So you can just go to lib.umich.edu and put in Fight the Tower, Asian American Women, and it'll come up as an ebook. And you will usually need to log in with your U of M unique name credentials, and you'll be able to read the whole book online. So thank you to our library staff for doing that for us. All right. So I have the pleasure to introduce to you the editors today. They're going to each give a presentation, and so I'm going to introduce them individually first. And then after that, we're going to have a question and answer conversation period. So if you have questions during their presentations, please go ahead and log those into the Q&A box. All right. And if you have comments during their presentation, please go ahead and put that in the chat box. Okay. And we'll be monitoring those as we go along. All right. Thank you. Our first speaker is Dr. Kieu Linh Caroline Valverde. She's an associate professor of Asian American Studies. Yay. I think this is the first time we've had for the webinar this semester 3 Asian American women, Asian American Studies professors as the main speakers, y'all. Change is in the air. Dr. Valverde is an associate professor of Asian American Studies and the founding director of the new Viet Nam Studies Initiative at the University of California, Davis. She is the author of Transnationalizing Viet Nam, Community, Culture, and Politics in the Diaspora, co-founder of the social justice movement Fight the Tower, and co-editor of Fight the Tower, Asian American Women Scholars, Resistance and Renewal in the Academy. Please give a warm welcome all the way from Oakland, California, Dr. Kieu Linh Caroline Valverde.
Thank you so much. I'm hoping everyone can hear me, and I'm gonna start sharing my screen. I want to start by saying that if you're wondering who's this strange woman, because you saw another picture there, you know, I have my COVID haircut, and it's in part in reaction to what's going on in society, and just, you know, wanting that change and seeing that change coming. And I also want to thank University of Michigan and particularly Dr. Emily Lawsin for inviting us. And, you know, she is the poster woman for what we wrote about, and we have you know, been following her very closely since the, you know, the creation of our text, and she exemplifies that you know, that powerful woman that will not be silenced and will fight for her place in the academy and creating these kind of spaces for all. So thank you for inviting me today. And so please be patient as we're gonna try to do the sharing situation. And so I want to present here. I want to make sure everyone can see my screen right now with my first page. Just if someone can unmute and say yes, I'll be ready to go.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so you know, we were prompted with the question by Grace Lee Boggs. What time is it on the clock of the world? And this resonated with me so deeply because, you know, I and others see this time as a major shift globally. I mean, there's some obvious reasons because of the global pandemic, but, you know, what is it really bringing out for us in the world? So even as many are, you know, suffering because of the health issues, suffering because of the economic, you know, downturn, etc., many of us also see it as an opportunity for change in a global pandemic. Right? What it's done in many ways is expose social ills in society as a whole. You know, you see it with the leadership, you see it, you know, on the streets, you see it with these sort of seemingly isolated incidents that really have deep roots in our history of injustice in the United States and discrimination, you know, within a myriad of you know, factors, including gender, sexuality, class, etc. So this is really an opportunity to reveal the truth about social injustice of the vast majority of the world, right? And it's also about building solidarity. It is opportunities to come together and resist social engineering projects, such as the creating of difference to divide and conquer. So even though this book is, you know, very much about Asian American women, we really wrote it in explicitly as an issue that is larger. And we define social engineering as the intellectual, physical, and psychological manipulation of populations involving centralized planning and modification of environment in order to shape and control behaviors and ideas that do not exist inherently or natural within individuals or cultures, but is systematized social engineering humans as individuals or group are perceived and treated as animals or machine to be controlled and molded to desired specifications in order to fulfill specific functions. And of course, the common methods of social engineering include social construction of ideas and concepts, control of laws, policies, and institutions, and behavioral experimentation. Social engineering can and has been utilized by and on governments, corporations, private groups, and individuals. And it's most powerful when applied and through various institutions, particularly those pertaining to media, health, correctional, and in education. So, and one of the major tools they have is, through this social construction and ideas around race, right? And so that makes it, it becomes very reductionist. And in these times, it is an opportunity for solidarity, but it also could be a situation where in vulnerable times we're weakened and we then fall to the victimization ideas of divide and conquer, which is always the goal, right? Because together we are strong. Okay. So it is also when we ask, what time is it in the world, right? And when that's in the macro level, but when you take it to this, the smaller level, it's really, we saw this as a bigger problem, in world sense, in a global sense, but we wanted to sort of showcase that if it could happen to seemingly women who are doing well, that is Asian American in academia, right? Lay low and get along, go along, get along kind of stereotype of the model minority. We wanted to show that if we can expose what's actually going on with the women in an institution that seems, untouchable. Like, everyone is so civil, and Asian American women are doing fine. And Asian Americans in general are well represented and doing fine. We felt we could at least sort of shock people into this, what's going on. And so really it was a fight for the life of Asian American women scholars. And I don't say this very lightly, it is the mental violence against Asian American women that then results in the physical, anguish and torture that many women then suffer within the academy, and actually some do not survive. And we have, even poetry and narratives to talk about this. And, I myself fell into, no less after a year of a brutal tenure battle, fell into a coma and was clinically dead for 90 minutes. And, I was gone for 2 weeks. And then, when I came out, that's when I found out that I actually won tenure on appeal. So I actually could have gotten tenure posthumously, right? So it is no joke. And there are many more within the academy, when we were going through grad school, and even now that we hear about that women, that do not survive, right? And of course, this translates to the physical violence against Asian American women. So we try to portray this in the academic institution, right? But, this idea it comes from somewhere, right? So, as social engineering is this manipulation of populations, right? Reverse social engineering is to delve deeper into how and why are we here? How is it that people buy into these ideas of, say, model minority, And it really comes back to the stereotypes of Asian American women that are perpetuated through Orientalist representations, and also in the violence and colonial military occupations that have existed in the places like Philippines, Vietnam, South Korea, so on and so on and so forth. And this is not just Asian, lands, but lands across the globe with 800 bases, American bases everywhere, where the world only has 30 bases combined, right? And you see, of course, you're well aware of the Georgia massacre, and it was perceived in the news as this, or at least the perpetrator, at least it was reported as it was not a racially motivated incident. But of course, knowing this history, as you've been taught, that darn well that images of Asian American women is also tied to this, sexual physical violence as well. And so it is no surprise that then these women were specifically targets of this, fantasy that has been perpetuated in our society, and it manifests itself in these very fatal incidences. So the truth of the matter is, we know that model minority is a myth. Okay, that is fine. But then what are we really, right? And we discovered that really we're the privileged oppressed. We have this so-called, privileged status honorary, white, model minority, whatever, on the surface, but in actuality, how we are treated and how we are dispensable, how we are used as a wedge, how we internalize these, racist, sexist, ideas, even within our own communities, really says that we are privileged on the surface, but actually we are severely, oppressed, right? So, so from this, awakening, and in my case, the literal, coming back to life, this woke, moment, what, really came around with this also this idea of wokeness, which has now become this sort of trite meme, but actually is very, very important, because in the Fight Tower movement, it really, starts off with that moment when you realize, okay, and there are a lot of communities that, have been historically and overtly discriminated against. Like, not only they're discriminated against, but they're stereotypically, defined as violent or dumb or lazy, etc. Right? And by the way, Asian Americans have also historically been identified with these, same adjectives, and similarly, that's why we're it's like a retro version of anti-Asian discrimination and stereotypes that's coming back now, creating all this violence. But in any case, this moment of wokeness, and for Asian American, what does this mean? So for other communities, because they systemically have been oppressed, they live a life of wokeness. Like, we don't trust our government, we don't trust the police, we don't trust, because they've harmed our community. So that certain communities are wired that way. Asian American communities, because of recent, generations, have had this model minority myth. Oftentimes are just blinded by this, lack of, history and understanding. So what does wokeness look like for this group, right? Oftentimes is this like moment when you feel as Asian American women that, oh my God, I've been fed a lie. I've been fed a lie. It's not about this dream where if you just, do everything as you're told and work hard, then you'll receive this thing through this other thing called meritocracy, success through meritocracy, let's say. And you find out, no, you have been, engineered to be this dispensable population, this wedge, and that wokeness is actually very psychologically damaging, because your whole identity in society was based on something, and then overnight, something dramatic happens, right? And you're dispensable. In the case of the academy, you could be denied tenure, promotions, you could be harassed, you can number of things to sort of like basically put you in your place. That wokeness is jarring, right? And what happens from that wokeness is you feel, oh my God, possibly I'm the only one. Like, so immediately that first phase of the wokeness is that, you realize you've been fed a lie. And then you feel you're alone, and you feel you're isolated, right? So the Fight the Tower movement came along to say, hey, there is a collective wokeness situation that, all these Asian American women scholars across the nation are experiencing the same oppressions in these dramatic ways, are fighting for their position in the academy. And, for someone like Emily or Wei Ming and myself, we fight so hard because we know darn well that it took so many generations for us to get in the position we're in. And so this is some of the first generations that are getting tenured, that are moving up in the ranks or into the administrative role. And therefore, we are in a position to help other generations coming up. If we're gone, it's like a reboot, a restart, and it could take a long time. So we had to come together and say, we're not isolated. They want us to believe that we didn't quite make it. No, we didn't have the academic excellence, but in reality, we're not isolated, and we need to come together. So we did come together as this movement to have a collective voice across intersections of race, class, sexuality, belief systems, age, migration status, etc. Womanhood, motherhood, you name it, right? And it was across ethnic groups as well. Because we immediately found solidarity within each other, and we offered resources, legal resources, camaraderie, letter writing, whatever was needed. We stepped up, right, and we maintain a social presence, social media presence, and we are here. We are here. And from that, immediately we wrote a manifesto. And so in this manifesto, it lists, a number of grievances, but it says the academic institutions create barriers for women of color to prevent our admissions to graduate programs, access to tenure track position, tenure, administrative power, professional success and advancement, especially at the top tier universities, right? So, that goes without saying, we're kind of relegated to the other types of universities that may are not seen as prestigious or wide-reaching. Those of us that make it through the system are constantly under scrutiny, and this makes work progress difficult and every advancement effort a battle. So other professors, I imagine, I fantasize, I don't know, get to sit down and work, and mentor students. That's their work. We know we have to do that work. We have to mentor more students because there's more students of color that need this kind of mentorship in a school that's predominantly, individuals of color, male, for example. And so we are not only being professors, let's say, and lecturers and teachers and so on and so forth, but we are also constantly dealing with the toxic, hostile, aggressive environment that that exists for us. And it's not even this, sort of unwritten word, situation is actually quite overt, right? And it is painful. It's extremely painful. So imagine if you're, you basically are deemed as incompetent, deemed as troublemakers, and all these things, and that you really don't care for the county, and very, very lot of gaslighting, if you will, that exists. So we have to deal with that while we're teachers. So that takes a toll. And then also we have families and elders we take care of. It's compounded, So we speak truth to power to expose the unjust and discriminatory practice aimed at us and demand fair representation and access to all levels of the academy. And so this was a very angry, cross-sectional, race, women of color manifesto. And it was co-written, and we are very proud of it. That's in the book as well. And then it was clear from that point that anthology needed to happen. And the reason for this is because there was still that a circumstance where individuals are told that you're an isolated incident, you're an anomaly, we can get rid of you by distancing you from other potential allies, and then you'll be gone. And so it's very difficult to fight that sort of like administrative or system that universities are at. And universities are very much protected. Like if you even have a lawsuit against them, most legal entities will sort of defer to the civil and intellectual groups that are existing in the academy. And I say these things with quotes, and so, what needed to be created was evidence. We needed to provide evidence of the abuse in the academy, right? And so our work is largely empirical in a sense, because and we worked very hard for this, because it is one thing to have the testimonials, which in and of itself is really politically powerful, right? And those stories need to be told, but it is buttressed too by the empirical work, and so a lot of our articles in the anthology itself looks at surveys and statistics and like one survey at USC, for example, notoriously maybe we'll get back to describing that particular chapter and others, but we're also really showcasing the voices of those that fought, because it's not like this is the historical moment that Asian Americans choose to fight, or Asian American women in the academy choose to fight. We've always fought. An example of this is Rosalie Tung over at Penn State Wharton School of Business, where she fought for her tenures and promotion, and it was very overt racism and sexism instances, and her case went all the way to the Supreme Court. And because of her, now tenure cases are transparent, right? And that is for everyone. This is an Asian American woman who fought at the top of the school in the nation. She won and opened the door for others to have that voice and for their cases to be transparent. And so we offer possibilities for change, right? This is very much about change. And so I come as like sort of the fight, the fight the tower, is very much my voice. And so, towards the latter part of developing this book, we brought in the amazing Wei Ming, who was, very much well known for her, excellent, edit work. And she brought with it a lot of the hope and the renewal, right? And it's this idea that, okay, we need to fight, we need to get the empirical data, we need to do this. But, afterwards, what are some of, the ways in which we can conceivably fight within the institutions? How do we get into the positions of power and difference, and to make a difference? And she'll talk more in her presentation. So the contributors are, first of all, they're some of the most, they're very brave. Each and every one decided to put their name. And that meant that they could be under attack. And, but when and myself, you saw from my bio that my area is not in higher education. My area is in political development in Vietnam and the diaspora. But, this was an important work from the movement to the anthology. And I thought I would basically get fired from having this book, not exactly, promotions or anything like that. And so the contributors were extremely brave. And in fact, the project itself took years in the making, because, I fell into coma just in the beginning, January 9th, 2013. And we were already, I was already CASA-led at that point anyway, because of my tenure, national and international tenure battle. But nevertheless, after that, this was a major issue, and we needed to fight for that. And then, so we brought in, it was a really good representation from small liberal arts universities to the larger state schools, etc. And we also have contributors from undergraduate, all the way to like senior administrators like provosts, etc. Right? And some of them occupy different roles. Like they may have started out as a lecturer and then they ultimately left the academy, or they started out as assistant professor and they left academy, or they went from undergrad to graduate students, from PhD to teachers, etc. But in any case, they were extremely brave. And it took them even years to, because the process took so long, like I said, 2013, all the way to, 2018, 19, 20, as this, book was coming out. And in some cases, we waited for them to deal with their battles and when they felt, quote unquote, safe to really fully, come out. But others, just there was no safety in what they were doing, but they felt really compelled to come out and speak. And of course, we also had, representation from international faculty as well. And of course, the ever-growing 70% plus adjunct population of faculty. And so, the situation is this, right? We really have the numbers stacked against us. And these are some of the numbers that Shirley Hume, sort of the mother of, or the godmother, or the, I don't know, of Asian American studies, in particular Asian American women. She's done some amazing empirical work around looking at the ways in which Asian American women, for example, are tenured at less than 2%. And so she was really monumentally important in bringing that these kind of statistics out for us, but also, it really says what? It really says that there is no place in the academy for Asian American women, or is set up as such. Because if you have this narrow window of less than 2% of Asian and Asian American, women, in tenure positions, that is, you have security of employment in order to say the controversial things that you should be saying all along, protected, but you're not. And then so supposedly you're protected by tenure. And actually, by the way, we can talk a lot more about that in the question and answer. But there's no such thing as protection, tenure or not, because if they want you gone, they will find every which way to manipulate the situation to get rid of you. And so our numbers are bleak. And really, it says there is no place in the academy for you or someone that looks like you. And so what do? You got to fight for that position, right? They're not going to give it to you. And so the sections are, set up where we actually use the metaphor of Star Wars, which really in its inception, George Lucas was thinking of the Vietnam War, right? And sort of the imperial reach of the United States in places like the Philippines and Vietnam, and taking over these areas as an imperial force, right? And so we thought that was very fitting. And also we, both Wei Ming and I are big sci-fi nerds, and then we really relate to our students in that way. And her presentation also follows that Star Wars theme. And so we start out with, world famous poet and award-winning poet Ping Wong, to sort of set the tone of each of the sections, right? And it's broken up into the taking action, right? And then fear is to the path of dark side, introducing the fight. And of course, I'll there's time, I'll have Wei Ming go into more detail how these chapters are broken down, and also the importance of the poetry. And of course, there's no moon, attack the institution, you're advised to lower your defenses. So all these themes are saying, hey, this is what happens. You start out, you have this woke moment, they come after you, and you think you have a little, you make a little leeway, lead, and then they come after you again, so with the Empire Strike Back kind of thing. And then you have no choice but to fight, right? Do or do not. There's no try. So, is this idea that we got to move forward, and in what way? And so the academia needs to really be awoken, right? And this is the, we are one with the force, and the force is one with us. And this is the idea of coming together in solidarity. Because I think what's, was really clear to me as a person who did this kind of miraculous thing where I was denied tenure. I appealed and had this, amazing campaign that involves students, my colleagues, community members, politicians, and then I won tenure. And so that really made me a unicorn. Okay, it really made me a unicorn in the academy. And those who fight know how difficult this is, right? But I had the support of so many people. I'm so grateful for that. And so so then people wanted to know, what's your secret? How did you do this, right? So not surprisingly, the first batch of people that came to me were, Asian American women, right? And they said, how can I help you? How can you help me? And I help them. Then the next group of women were, the next group of people were Asian American men, actually. Okay, so they said, how can you help me? I helped them. Then Latino women, Latino men. And then next group actually were white women, right? And then so, you kind of continue this path. And the next group, I'm sure that's going to come to me, is white men. All right. How did you do it? How did you, make it through the academy? What does it say? What does it say about this kind of stereotype that, this group has this? Yes, in our society, certain groups on the surface are given, these privileges, and again, it's to divide and conquer purposes, but the academy as a whole is broken. If it doesn't work for a white man, it's broken, I mean, that's it, we're done, and so, how are we to come together? Because really, when we see this, we realize that historically we have come together. We've come together as laborers. We have come together, as scholars. We've come together as activists. We've come together and we've been strong. We set a movement that changed policies, that gave not only liberation for communities, but just a strong sense of self as humans, right? only to be, broken down again over the generations, right? So in this time, it is, we saw the writing on the wall very early. We saw that all these movements, the Me Too, the Black Lives Matter, and now the anti-Asian hate movement, it's going to be just like the people who came to talk to me, right? The immigrant folks, all these movements, it's like those scholars that came to talk to me. It's broken. If you want to look at academia as a broken system, then look at larger society and the world as broken under these, systems that serve to extract resources and abuse labor and control systems. That's what is in place. That's what we're really ultimately talking about. So I want to come back with this Grace Lee Boggs, in her question of where are we in the time of the world, right? And so she had a shift, and it was an important shift, and it's a shift that we should all sort of think about at this point. So being an activist, a radical activist, she struggled initially with this idea of King's words. She saw it as, speaking to a mainstream that sort of waters down the importance of the movement, and also sort of glorifying this one iconic individual. If she had to pick one, she certainly would have picked Malcolm X in her own words. But but over time, 30 years, in fact, so there was a civil rights movement but by 2013, she realized that 2007, around there, she realized that let's really think about King's words, right? Especially in his last 2 years of his life, right? He recognized, okay, we start with the fight for Black, brown, color folks here. And he realized, oh no, this is a bigger issue than that. What's going on in Vietnam really woke him up to that, this imperial stretch of the suppression and injustice, right? So Boggs identifies, King's new kind of revolution, a struggle against racism with a struggle against poverty, militarism, materialism. Because as the pandemic is going on, all these things are coming up to surface more. And we recognize that food is an issue, environment is an issue. And the ways in we think about economy is an issue because there's not a pandemic-proof economy as it was. And what's this new thing that we need to resurface to, Is it moving forward? It's not enough to move back. This idea of back to normal. No. It needs to move forward, right? So self-transformation, self-transforming, structure transforming, moving beyond oneself to reflect all of us as global citizens. And that here is just prophetic, because we don't have to think of what would it like if we're all in the same boat? Because in a global pandemic, we literally, are kind of tied together by this disease, right? And so it's giving birth to a new society. Everyone is precious and worth care. There you go. That's the answer to a pandemic-proof economy. We care for each other, and you see it. You see it when you're helping your neighbors. You're seeing when you're growing food in your gardens. And Boggs, of course, did a lot of work around this area. And we make a life better for everyone. Each of us becoming the change we want to see in this world, right? And of course, that's the Mahatma Gandhi. But really, it is about that possibility for change. So I just listed quickly here the details of how to reach me or find out more about me. But here again are some of the heroes in Asian American studies, always in solidarity with folks of color in the Black Lives Movement, and now there's more avenues and spaces for Black communities to support what we're doing, and I do have hope in the future. So I'll end my talk then, and I'm sorry if I went over.
Hey, let's give Dr. Valverde a round of applause. That was amazing. Thank you so much. Y'all can see the website kiulin.com. Also, shout out to graceleeboggs.com. We will have the producer and director of the film on Grace Lee Boggs with us on Wednesday at 1 p.m. For a webinar as well. Grace Lee will be joining us. All right, our next speaker I have known since we were students like you all, and I'm not going to tell you the year because I don't give away my age. Dr. Dariotis might do it, but I don't. But literally, we sat next to each other when we graduated together from the University of Washington because we were both student activists in the Asian Pacific Islander Student Union. Go OPSU, UW. Uh, Dr. Ming Dariotis is a professor of Asian American Studies at San Francisco State University. She is co-editor of the book War Baby, Love Child, Mixed Race Asian American Art, which is a beautiful, amazing book. If you have never seen it, you have never seen another book like it. That's for sure. And Fight the Tower. Asian American Women Scholars Resistance and Renewal in the Academy. She's also co-author of the definition of critical mixed race studies. She wears many hats on the campus of San Francisco State University, which she's going to tell you a little bit about. Please give a warm welcome from San Francisco, California, 3 hours ahead of us, to Dr. Ming Dariotis.
Good morning, everybody. Yeah, I'm going to totally out you, Emily. It was 1991. Oh my God, it was literally 30 years ago. I was a senior in college, and I remember, your professor, Lawsin, my Manang Emily, who was a student leader, actually, and I really thought of her as my teacher in Asian American activism in OPSU. Before I get into my current context, I actually did want to spend a little time back there 30 years ago, because I think it speaks so much to what's going on today. At the time, I didn't really see myself as Asian American. I'm mixed race, and I had never really been fully embraced by Chinese Americans. And so I didn't totally know if OPSU was a place that would accept me. And I came to realize something which I've learned more fully through the work of Harvey Dong, who runs an Asian American bookstore in Berkeley and teaches at UC Berkeley, and who was one of the student activists in 1968, which was the year at Berkeley, which was the year that the term Asian American was birthed into being. And that is that Asian American is not a racial identity. It is a political identity. And with Emily, I came to accept myself as an Asian American, meaning that I was making a commitment to support and better Asian American communities. And one of the topics that we fought for, because OPSU was not a student club where we just gathered and had amazing, and I do mean amazing, potlucks. It was foremost an organization that was an activist organization. One of the issues that we fought for that year was around accent bias. There was a law proposed in Washington State that international faculty and graduate students, and I think they took out the faculty part because of political backlash, but they kept in the graduate students part, would have to be tested on their language skills, their spoken English proficiency by a native speaker of English. And this was one of the big issues that we fought that year. And 30 years later, I'm still seeing these issues coming back into academia. So I just wanted to use that as the framework. I'm going to share my screen with you all. And I am just going to talk story a little bit around this idea of creating an anti-racist university during the pandemic, but within the context of Fight the Tower. So I'm first going to start with a self-introduction, which to me, this is what I've been doing recently. I noticed the connections between pronoun declarations and land acknowledgements during some of my work, and it made me think of doing a context and positionality statement as a self-introduction, which performs many functions, including identifying aspects of your identity that may be unperceived by others, which helps people find points of connection. 2, identifying your awareness of relationships of power, both institutional and personal, and to help us bring our whole selves to our shared work. So My name is Ming Dariotis, and although I've always been comfortable being addressed as Mings by colleagues in informal settings, my late colleague and our dear friend, Dr. Dawn Mabalan, taught me that as a woman of color, I'm an aspirational role model for other women and feminine identified people, and thus I should claim my title. So my preferred form of address by colleagues in formal settings and by students is Dr. Dariotis. So basically, in any situation in which you would use the formal title of a white man, please use mine. That's how I put it. I'm a full professor of Asian American Studies, which makes me one of the only 2% of full professors who are Asian American women. I'm an affiliate faculty with the Educational Leadership Doctoral Program and faculty director of CEDL, the Center for Equity and Excellence in Teaching and Learning at San Francisco State. I identify as a Chinese, Greek, Swedish, cisgender, bisexual, queer woman. By marriage, I'm part of an extended Chinese American family with 5 generations in San Francisco through my stepfather, and a Black, Irish, Lenape Muslim family from New Jersey. I was born in Adelaide, Australia, in the land of the Kaurna Mayuna, and raised in San Francisco, where I currently live and work on the unceded, unyielded territory and traditional home of the Ramaytush Ohlone people, whose work and creativity in shaping this land and its plants and animals for 15,000 years impacts me and my family daily. And I will add that an elder in the Ramaytush Ohlone community asked that we take care of the land and that we take care of each other. Trying to advance to my next slide. There we go. Recently, I wrote a poem which continues the rest of my self-introduction. And this poem is called Asian American Middle Woman, Middle Management. I wrote this poem last month in a state of pure frustration with being in a kind of middle management position and having the responsibility of doing a lot of diversity work for our campus, pretty much all the diversity work for our campus, and not actually having any power. I am your traitor translator, Ming Dariotis, the Chinese Greek. Can you see the Swedish in me? I'm just as much white as I need to be to offer you my services in your language, Vår de lingua patria. This is my personal land acknowledgement for this particular purpose at this specific moment. I live, work, and betray on the unceded territory and traditional home of the Ramaytush Ohlone people, whose lands we will not return, no way, no how. Having grown up in San Francisco, I am as ashamed of not knowing the names of the Ohlone peoples as I am that I used to tease my Chinese mother for how she said Palo Alto, woe of mother's tongue. I use the pronouns she, her, and sometimes ta, the gender-neutral Chinese I imposter claim as inauthentic, unfilial daughter, traitor translator I. Who will I betray today? So last year, when the Black Lives Matter movement started to become big news, I was asked by my administrator to write a solidarity statement for our unit, the Center for Equity and Excellence in Teaching and Learning. At that time, I was the only member of our unit who was not a white woman. There were 10 people in my unit. So it was up to me, the one person of color, to write this statement and to work with a Black faculty member to come up with some resources to support this work. I was then asked to create an institute because so many faculty were sharing that they suddenly realized they needed to be more inclusive in their pedagogy, and they needed to be able to address the things that were going on in the world last year and this year, of course, also. And I had a month to pull together a team of faculty developers to create our first JEDI Institute, or Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion in Online Pedagogies of Inclusive Excellence. We call it the JEDI Pi Institute. So far, we've had 400 SF state faculty and GTAs certified in 3 cohorts. This is a 25-hour training which focuses on anti-racist pedagogy, looking at racism and white supremacy in education practice. And one of the activities I ask for folks to look at is actually white supremacy and racism within their own academic disciplines. We use a critical race perspective, and we do our best to get to know our students so that we can meet them where they are and help them shine, help their brilliance shine. There are 10 modules. The one that most of our faculty have had the biggest struggle with is land acknowledgements, because they're concerned that it will simply be a pro forma statement rather than anything meaningful. And I'm going to get back to that a little bit later. I've also been doing a newsletter on pedagogy for our campus. And one of the things that I do is I highlight the anti-racist pedagogy, and we have a circulation of 2,500 readers. Our faculty are about 1,500 faculty. So we have a pretty good reach throughout our campus to really bring forth anti-racist pedagogy. And then as a faculty director of CETL, I also co-organize our annual faculty retreat. This year, I was able to convince the campus to do how to be an anti-racist university as our theme. And we invited Chancellor Castro, who is the newly selected chancellor for the CSU system, which is a 23 campus system. It's the middle tier in California's public higher education system, and our campus president, Lynn Mahoney, to be the keynotes to address this issue of how we can be better an anti-racist university. Now, I did this strategically, not so much with an expectation that they would really lead us in this direction, but more with an expectation that having them have to present at this moment would force them to think and publicly speak about this issue in a way that they might not otherwise be inclined to do. And indeed, to kind of push them in that direction. When the Atlanta shootings happened, I, like many of my colleagues, was really overwhelmed. I felt disenfranchised, I felt disempowered, and I felt isolated. But I went to my happy place, which is collaboration, connection, and creation. So with that in mind, I started a shared Google Drive document, and I reached out to as many faculty colleagues as I could think of, and in fact, also staff at SF State. I combed the SF State websites for the names and email addresses of any AAPI women that I could find, faculty and staff. I found about 160 folks, and I emailed out to them this link and asked them, please contribute your resources to a shared collaborative teaching guide. I also shared it out nationally through my other connections and Facebook and whatever connections I could muster. And the link for that is this bottom link, and then the top link is to the CETL website that was created. Now, I had also pushed quite a bit on my my team in CETL to get more, how do I say this, more collaboration from them, because I was really feeling the burden of having to do all the anti-racism work. Now, I was able to build a team of faculty facilitators, but unsurprisingly, the younger women of color in the team were feeling a lot of burnout because of the extra burdens that they were carrying. Eventually, over the last month of conversations with my administrator and with other team members, something kind of beautiful happened. They decided to pull together, and this time, instead of me having to write the solidarity statement, they did it, and they did it deliberately as an act of support, if you will, and solidarity, to not make me do the work. They let me, they invited me to check it once it was done, but they didn't make me do the work. And they pulled together a really incredible website, which is, a beautifully designed, very accessible resource that begins with a solidarity statement. And it says, as educators, we need to teach about the structural intersectional racism that victimizes Asian and Asian American women in devastating ways. So this was actually drawn from something that I said during one of our meetings, but it helped us pull together this idea. As educators, we need to teach about how generations of systemic racism harm and victimize not only one racial group, but society as a whole. And as educators, we need to teach about how stereotypes are used to essentialize and diminish Asian identities, to dismiss their experiences and contributions. And then we were able to pull from data collected by my colleague, Dr. Russell Jung, in his Stop AAPI Hate reporting system, one of which data points I think is really important to highlight. 70% of the anti-Asian hate that's been reported on this website in the last year has targeted AAPI women. There is something specific about the way that AAPI women are racialized and sexualized in that intersection that makes it so that we are seen as easy targets and victims, okay? I was on a panel with Dr. Jung on Saturday for the California Faculty Association General Assembly. This panel started with sharing from a new API faculty member who's down in the Los Angeles area, sharing that her husband was her husband, a South Asian, was brutally beaten by a group of people at a restaurant in January, and onlookers did nothing to help or support him, and they felt helpless, and that they didn't even think it would be worthwhile to report it to the police because they felt so unsupported. And Dr. Jung then shared that, in fact, through the time period of the COVID crisis, the number one fear of Asian Americans has not been getting COVID. It has been anti-Asian violence, the number one anxiety. His study has also shown that Asian American students are the group that feels most uncomfortable with returning to school. And it is, again, because of anxiety over anti-Asian violence. The resource guide tries to address these issues. It is a continually developing resource guide. So if you go to this website, you can actually click on here and you'll be invited to share in the ongoing development of the resource. It includes solidarity statements from various places, general toolkits, including the Stop AAPI Hate, what to do, 5 ways to help if you witness hate, and other toolkits. Solidarity resources, white allyship resources, histories of anti-Asian racism, and then so many other resources. Particularly want to call out this one, which is around dehumanization, hypersexualization, and fetishization, which really reaches towards that intersection of Asian American gender identities. And then here, resources on violence against Asian and AAPI women specifically. So I hope that that you all will go into this resource and find it useful. In collecting these resources and, as I mentioned, sharing them out, I also reached out into my my community that I was leading, the faculty development community in the Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Institute. And that's when I got into trouble. So I sent out a message saying, warning, what follows refers to recent violence against Asians, especially the murder of multiple Asian American women in Atlanta on Tuesday. The following message may feel like and so you can see I wrote this, during a time of heightened emotion, obviously. It was right after the Atlanta shootings. The following message may feel like a strong push from me on an issue that is personal to me. This is true. I have a position that allows me to reach out to you all in a way that not everyone has. I didn't even edit this. Look at all the grammar mistakes. I hope that this is not seen as an abuse of this position, but instead as an appropriate use. As a way to empower myself and other Asian American women, staff, and faculty at SF State, I started a co-created resource, which I mentioned to you all. Once I sent that message out to those 160 plus folks, I received a lot of reach backs. Many people reached back to share their experiences, their fear, anger, anxiety, paralysis, and isolation. Some have also begun to contribute to the shared teaching resource document. A shared thread in what I've heard is that these shootings made public the kinds of sexualized racism many of us have experienced in our work lives at SF State and in living in the Bay Area. So I want to mention really that a lot of the focus is on the external, the scary things that happen outside. People telling me that their parents' restaurant was broken into, and this is in San Francisco, or that they got spit at while jogging because they are Asian, or somebody's mother was chased by a man yelling, "I'm going to find all the Chinese and kill them." So these are the external things that are happening. But what I also heard about, and what I've known for years, of course, is the internal things that happen in our campus. The things that happen between faculty, the things that happen even where faculty feel threatened by students. And it is an ongoing challenge to help the university realize that this is not only an external problem, but it's an internal problem, which was the point of Fight the Tower. Okay. I also mentioned that there are many people that are AAPI women, faculty, and staff who I could not locate because of the ways that our campus websites do things like not list information about lecturer faculty. Of course, there's no way to reach out to our campus custodians who at SF State are mostly Asian and Asian American women. Other staff who are not associated with academic departments are also outside the public eye. But when I am on campus, I notice that many of those people are Asian American women. Asian and Asian American women provide much of the invisible labor that makes San Francisco State University function. So I asked them, I hope that our campus leaders can lead the creation of a plan to address the extreme vulnerability of Asian American women in our institution, not just extra security officers, because the answer to Asian American violence is not more policing. More policing puts us actually into danger, as it does our Black, Latinx, and other BIPOC family and community members. It also implies that the violence is from the outside and that it is always macro violence. In fact, the violence is already inside and it ranges from macro to meso and to micro. But regardless of size, it is all wounding, especially when it is compounded. I'm going to say more about the compounding of the violence in a moment. It is compounded when institutional power structures either diminish the pain, like the Atlanta police chief did, who referenced the murderer's sex addiction and dismissed the charge of racism, or when campus leaders do not provide a response or acknowledgement. And this goes to what I was saying earlier about land acknowledgements. Land acknowledgements and solidarity statements are the basic thing that you can do. They're like a sympathy card. Yes, you should do more than that. But at the very least, we need to do that. I just lost my share screen for some reason.
Can you wrap in about a minute? Because we're at 11:12 here.
Okay, I'll try to do that really
Please, thank you.
quick.
Maybe go back to your slides because it's hard to see those documents.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, when I did that, I was scolded. I was told, stop using your megaphone to speak out, literally, by an administrator. And then since that time, I've received more emails, including one from a colleague who wants to speak out because her department is trying to put together a solidarity statement. And she's so angry because they're trying to put out a solidarity statement, but they're not addressing the racism within their department. And she wants to speak out about it, but her alternative, knowing that she's going to probably be harassed, probably be retaliated against, but the alternative, she says, remaining silent is not something I can live with. And I wanted to focus on that because I think that that's really the situation that so many of us are in. It's the silence is not something that we can live with. So I have a lot more on, how to make the university less racist. I have some suggestions, but maybe we can address those in the conversation to come. Thank you.
Woo! Amazing. Thank you so much. You could probably still share those last few slides just to keep them up while we're talking. And thank you to Dr. Valverde for joining us back on screen. For the audience members, we have about 6 minutes for Q&A. So if you have some questions that you'd like to ask, please type those in the chat, not in the chat, I'm sorry, in the Q&A box now. Students had to post some questions to our Canvas course website, and I'm just going to kind of triage those for you now. That's my alarm. Okay, if you press play, present, we could see it better. Dr. Dariotis? Yeah, awesome. Okay, all right. I'm going to throw you what we call speed questions. And this is something that the amazing facilitator and my doula, Adrienne Marie Brown, taught me. And we did this when I facilitated Q&A with her. I'm going to ask you a question. I'm going to ask you to answer in 1 to 5 words, if you can. Okay? And so it would be like, speed answer, rapid fire. Okay? The first question was, how were you able to collect data and the necessary information to write this book? Was there any difficult collection of analysis of Asian women?
Do you want, I can take that. So there were
1 to 5 words.
A survey of over 200 Asian American women, around the nation on health issues. And then the other one was looking at those who have been fired over the years and did not get tenure to understand who gets tenured and who doesn't.
Okay. Another question. What was your experience like getting this book published? Was there any pushback or difficulties because of the subject matter? Any of that?
I think the way was really paved for us by the volume Presumed Incompetent on Race and Gender in Academia, so that helped.
Yes, an excellent volume, Presumed Incompetent on Women of Color in the Academy. Please go check that out. It's an amazing book. Okay, I think we covered that one. All right, this is a good one. I think you both kind of hit on it, but maybe you want to say a couple more words. In light of rising Asian hate crimes or hate crimes against Asians, what are ways you believe Asian Americans can confront these harmful stereotypes? What are ways that allies can contribute in fighting and resisting these hate crimes against Asian Americans? Hard to do in 1 to 5 words.
A lot of it is internal community work to decolonize the mind of a lot of these stereotypes that we've internalized, because now it's hitting Asian Americans really hard, and they're starting to feel that pain other communities feel, or they're starting to be known about the pain they're feeling. So that, and also opening space in all communities for us to cross these very serious divides that have been created over centuries, for us to build solidarity across lines.
I typed exactly the same thing in the chat. Reach out to Black, Latinx, and other related communities, organize rallies, and make public protests. You're muted, Emily.
Awesome. Yes. Thank you. Yes, I always tell students, find your people, because they're there. We're here. We're still here. A question in the Q&A box from Temi. Temi says, for the K through 12 lawsuits, was it hard to find court cases relevant for your info? Because the names and circumstances of these cases were not taught to us in public schools, not surprisingly. And I had to do extra research outside of the prologue to familiarize, contextualize them. And in the notes for the court cases, if you were able to obtain them, did you notice anything that seemed outside of the norm?
Is the question about K to 12 cases, or the question is about K to 12 education of these higher ed cases? I'm not sure that question.
It's just for the K to 12 lawsuits.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of research that's already been done on the history of Asians in K to 12 education, starting with the Mamie Tate case. I mean, that's pretty well documented, but I guess what's less documented is what was the research that was done by Shirley Kuhn, and this is really what she's done. The majority of her research on for the last 40 years is looking at Asian American women and Asian American men also in higher education. And so the cases that she documented, that Shirley Kuhn documented in the prologue, I think are deserving of even more analysis and research, particularly Rosalie Tung's case. She should be internationally famous because of her fight and how it opened up the possibility of all faculty, regardless of race, to have access to their own personnel files, which is something that everybody takes for granted, but before her case in 1990 was not possible.
Yes, absolutely. Awesome. Okay, we are at the end of our session, but I just want to ask for both of you, if you could stop sharing your screen, Dr. Dariotis, if you have any last words you want to share with us.
For me, I just see this time as great opportunity for positive change moving forward in a much stronger, space than we've ever had. That we have to keep that hope and work harder than ever, because it'll go by so fleetingly, and we could lose that opportunity, and we cannot afford to lose these opportunities.
I would say if we want to drive change in our institutions, then we need to change how assessment is done. And I mean assessment of faculty by students, assessment of programs, and so forth, and institutionalize anti-racism as part of our assessment practices. Because once we do that, then the anti-racism will come.
Amazing. All right. If folks have a way to contact you, Dr. Dariotis, we put in Dr. Valverde's website. If you could put yours in the chat too, that would be really great. We want to thank you all for joining us today for this webinar. There was a question if the recording will be made available. Yes, we did record this. Lisa Toon, our staff person in American Culture, runs all of our events, has been really kind enough to upload all of the webinars that I've done this semester onto our YouTube channel for the Department of American Culture on YouTube, and we'll share those out to our website as well. I think we could also probably send a link to all of those who registered. I think, I don't want to make any promises from for Lisa, but please do buy the book or check it out, read it, assign it. It is amazing. We didn't even get to the poetry that ties together every section, which is my favorite, obviously, because I'm a poet. But it really, I think, gives life and brings, like Dr. Valverde said, hope also to the volume. So I just want to thank you all for joining us today. And please fight the tower. As we say in Filipino, makibaka, fight the struggle, wag magtakot, have no fear. Yeah, we should take a shot of that. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Do it again.
Yeah. Lisa, maybe you could take the shot.
Yeah, here we go.
I don't know if she got it.
All
All right.
right. Thank you so much.